Hi everyone, peace to you all, and welcome back to the show. The world watched as Zionist propaganda went into overdrive, and honestly, it's gotten sloppy. International media outlets, even those sympathetic to Israel in the past, are starting to call them out on their nonsense. And that brings us to the topic of today's show, the rise of the Muslim Zionist. Remember the Abraham Accords? Those shiny agreements that promised peace and prosperity? Yeah, those. Well, they've actually been a disaster for the Palestinian cause. They've emboldened Israel, given them cover on the world stage, and paved the way for the normalization of relations with countries that should know better. And who's benefited the most? You guessed it, the Muslim Zionist network. One of the biggest lies Israel tries to sell the world is this idea that it's a vibrant, pluralistic democracy. They want you to believe that Jews and Muslims coexist peacefully within its borders, that everyone is treated equally under the law. But here's the reality. That image, that narrative, is a carefully constructed facade. Beneath the surface lies a system built on discrimination, segregation, and oppression. Let's not mince words here. What's happening in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories is apartheid. Over 17 Israeli human rights groups have come to the same conclusion. They've seen firsthand the discriminatory laws, the land confiscations, the restrictions on movement. These are fundamental human rights being systematically denied to an entire people based solely on their ethnicity. This is where the Muslim Zionists come in. They are the willing participants in this charade, the useful idiots who lend their voices and faces to legitimize a system built on oppression. They talk about coexistence while ignoring the daily realities of the occupation, and sometimes they're not even real. This is the insidious nature of propaganda, my friends. It doesn't need to be sophisticated or even believable to be effective. All it needs is repetition, a receptive audience, and a willingness to exploit existing biases. And Israel, unfortunately, has become a master at this game. The Abraham Accords weren't just about establishing formal diplomatic ties between Israel and a handful of Arab states. They were about normalizing the occupation, whitewashing Israel's crimes, and silencing any opposition to its apartheid regime. And they've been frighteningly effective. Arab leaders who were once vocal critics of the occupation are now falling over themselves to sign trade deals and pose for photo ops with Israeli officials. Section 3. Muslim Zionism, a contradiction in terms. Let's be clear, there's no such thing as a Muslim Zionist. To be a Muslim is to believe in justice, equality, and the inherent dignity of all human beings. To be a Zionist, on the other hand, is to support a system built on the dispossession, oppression, and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. Section 1. The rise of the Opportunists. The signing of the Abraham Accords was like a starting pistol for opportunistic individuals within certain Muslim communities. These are the social climbers, the clout chasers, the individuals who crave recognition and validation. They saw the way the wind was blowing, they saw which side their bread was buttered on, and they made their choice. Section 2. Selling out for fame and fortune. Let's not pretend that this is about anything other than personal gain. These self-proclaimed Muslim Zionists aren't stupid. They know what they're doing. They understand the power dynamics at play. They recognize where the money and the influence lie, and they're more than willing to sell their souls for a piece of the pie. Section 3. The UAE, a breeding ground for Muslim Zionism. The Emirati regime, with its insatiable thirst for power and its utter disregard for human rights, has created the perfect environment for this kind of opportunism to flourish. It's a place where money talks, where loyalty is bought and sold, and where principles are easily discarded in pursuit of power and wealth. It's no surprise, then, that individuals willing to betray the Palestinian cause would find a welcoming home in the UAE. Section 4. Normalizing treachery, sanitizing apartheid. What's perhaps most disturbing about the rise of this Muslim Zionist network is not just their willingness to parrot Israeli propaganda, but their active participation in sanitizing the image of apartheid. They've become complicit in the system, witting collaborators in a project designed to erase Palestinian identity, history, and claims to their own land. They use their platforms to spread misinformation, to downplay the severity of the situation in Palestine, and to paint a rosy picture of coexistence that exists only in their imaginations. Meet the Muslim Zionists. These individuals align with oppression, trading integrity for a platform, normalizing Palestinian suffering. Faris Hammadi, an Emirati commentator, praises dictators and criticizes those challenging his views. He applauded Mohammed bin Zayed for ties with Israel, condemned by human rights groups. When Muslims protested Israel's assault on Gaza, he criticized them as emotional and irrational. Another is the unofficial Emirati regime spokesperson, praising pro-Israel, anti-Palestinian agendas on Twitter. He supports Narendra Modi's crackdown on Muslims and India's settler colonial project in Kashmir. He attacks journalists and activists, exposing the regime's hypocrisy and brutality. Section 2. Shilling for Genocide. These aren't just harmless commentators with misguided opinions. These are individuals who are actively contributing to the normalization of genocide. They are providing cover for a regime that's systematically killing, displacing, and oppressing entire people. And they're doing it all while claiming to be Muslims, while invoking the language of peace and tolerance, while pretending to be champions of interfaith dialogue. Remember that horrific video that surfaced online a few months ago, the one showing Israeli soldiers cheering as they bombed a building in Gaza, a building filled with families, with children? That's the reality of what these so-called Muslim Zionists are supporting. That's the kind of brutality they're trying to normalize. They'll talk about Hamas. They'll point fingers at Palestinian resistance groups. They'll trot out the same tired old talking points about terrorism and self-defense. But don't be fooled. This isn't about security, it's about land. It's about ethnic cleansing. It's about the slow and methodical erasure of the Palestinian people from their own land. And these individuals, these useful idiots, are complicit in this project. They are the smiling faces of apartheid, the friendly voices of oppression, the collaborators who enable a system built on violence and injustice to continue operating with impunity. Section 3. Madkalis, the useful idiots of our time. The Muslim Zionist network doesn't operate in a vacuum. They are part of a larger ecosystem of individuals and organizations that benefit from the status quo, from the silencing of dissent, from the unquestioning obedience of the masses. And one of the most insidious groups within this ecosystem is the Madkhalis. Now, the Madkhalis are a curious bunch. They present themselves as pious, devout Muslims, deeply concerned with upholding Islamic law and preserving the purity of the faith. But beneath this veneer of religiosity lies a deeply authoritarian ideology, one that preaches unquestioning obedience to rulers, no matter how corrupt or tyrannical they may be. They become the darlings of authoritarian regimes across the Muslim world. Their pronouncements of obedience and their denunciations of dissent music to the ears of dictators and despots who crave nothing more than the unquestioning loyalty of their subjects. And their stance on Palestine? Well, let's just say it's perfectly aligned with the interests of their Zionist and Gulf Arab patrons. They'll criticize Israel, sure, but only in the vaguest of terms, careful never to offend their Emirati and Saudi sponsors. They'll condemn Hamas, of course, because that's what their paymasters demand. But you'll never hear them utter a word of condemnation for the regimes that are actively arming and funding Israel, the regimes that are complicit in the siege of Gaza, the regimes that are actively working to undermine Palestinian resistance. Section 4. Exposing the network. It's important to understand that these individuals, these Muslim Zionists and their Madkhali enablers, are not representative of the Muslim community as a whole. They are a fringe minority, a group of opportunistic individuals who've chosen to align themselves with power and privilege at the expense of their own people. But their voices are being amplified, their platforms are growing, and their influence is spreading. And that's why it's so crucial to expose them, to challenge their narratives, and to counter their propaganda with the truth. We need to be vigilant, my friends. We need to be aware of the tactics being used to manipulate public opinion, to silence dissent, and to normalize oppression. We need to be willing to speak out against injustice, to amplify the voices of the oppressed, and to hold those in power accountable for their actions. Authentic Islam vehemently opposes the injustices inflicted upon the Palestinian people. True Muslims recognize the Palestinian struggle as their own. They see the suffering in Gaza and the West Bank and are compelled to act, and they are not alone. Anti-Zionist Jews refuse to equate Judaism with the actions of the Israeli state. Criticizing Israel's policies is not anti-Semitic. It's a moral imperative. This is the unity that threatens the narrative of division and discord. They want the world to believe that Muslims and Jews are natural enemies. But the truth is far more powerful. The fight for Palestinian liberation transcends religious and ethnic boundaries. The Muslim Zionists and their Madkhali enablers want you to believe they represent the true face of Islam, that their message of obedience and subservience to power is the authentic expression of the faith. They'll cloak themselves in religious rhetoric. They'll quote scripture. They'll present themselves as the guardians of piety and righteousness. But their actions betray their true intentions. They are the Pharisees of our time, more concerned with appearances, with maintaining their proximity to power, than with upholding the true principles of justice and compassion that are at the heart of Islam. These are the false prophets of our time, and their time is running out. The rise of the Muslim Zionist network reflects their fragmentation and disunity in the Muslim world. Decades of divide and conquer tactics have sown distrust and suspicion. Yet, the Palestinian spirit of resistance remains unbroken. Despite overwhelming odds, they continue to fight for freedom and dignity. They refuse to be silenced or erased. Their struggle is a beacon of hope and a call to action. Their fight is our fight. We cannot afford to be bystanders. Silence is complicity. Every tweet we ignore, every news article we scroll past, every conversation we avoid is a victory for the oppressors. We must educate ourselves about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and seek out alternative sources that amplify Palestinian voices. We have a responsibility to speak out against injustice and hold those in power accountable. Support organizations providing aid and legal assistance to Palestinians. Use social media to amplify Palestinian voices and challenge pro-Israel propaganda. Support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions BDS movement to pressure Israel to respect Palestinian rights. This is about working towards a future where all people can live together in peace, dignity, and freedom. Do not forget to tap on the like, subscribe, and share buttons, and also leave a comment.